In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful. Before revelation changed the course of history, there were years of work, family responsibility, and quiet trust. Among the respected merchants of Makkah was Khadijah bint Khuwaylid. Seerah accounts remember her as a woman of dignity, intelligence, and substantial commercial activity. Trade across Arabia often depended upon agents. Goods and capital could be entrusted to someone who traveled far beyond the owner's direct supervision, where decisions had to be made and accounts could be manipulated. In such work, skill mattered, but character mattered more. A profitable journey could still conceal dishonesty. A trustworthy agent protected another person's property when temptation and distance made betrayal easier. Reports of Muhammad's honesty and good conduct were already known in Makkah, and Seerah accounts connect him with commercial work undertaken on Khadijah's behalf. The sources preserve differing details about the journey and the reports that followed it, so we will not invent scenes, conversations, or private observations. What remains clear is the quality at the center of the account: trust. The man known as Al-Amin carried the same integrity into business that people had seen in ordinary life. His reliability was not limited to moments of public importance. It appeared in the careful handling of duties that belonged to someone else. The connection formed through trust led to marriage. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was about 25 years old. Reports differ regarding Khadijah's exact age at the time, and responsible narration should acknowledge that difference rather than present one disputed figure as certain. Their marriage is remembered not through invented romantic dialogue, but through what the years themselves revealed: loyalty, stability, affection, and profound mutual confidence. Khadijah remained his only wife until her death. Their household experienced joy, responsibility, and painful loss. Children were born into the family, and some died young, a grief familiar to many households in that time. Marriage also joined responsibilities beyond two individuals. Kinship, hospitality, dependence, commercial obligations, and the needs of the wider community all entered the life of a household. Stability did not mean freedom from difficulty. It meant meeting difficulty without abandoning trust. Yet no private scene needs to be imagined for the significance of these years to become clear. Khadijah knew Muhammad before the public mission, before followers gathered around him, and before opposition made association with him costly. She knew his conduct at home, his treatment of relatives and guests, his concern for those in need, and the steadiness of his word. Later, when an overwhelming burden entered their lives, her response would rest upon knowledge formed over many ordinary days. Trust built slowly can become strength in a moment of crisis. The quiet household was therefore not an empty pause before the important story. It was one of the places where truthfulness became deeply known. Biographies often move quickly through these years because no public revelation had yet begun. But the absence of public preaching does not mean the absence of meaning. Human character is most thoroughly tested in repeated duties that receive no applause. A household requires patience when people are tired, generosity when resources are needed elsewhere, and restraint when frustration would make harshness easy. Work must be completed. Relatives must be honored. Guests must be received. The vulnerable must not be neglected. These repeated acts form a moral memory. When a sudden claim or crisis arrives, people judge it partly through everything they have already witnessed. A lifetime of contradiction weakens even eloquent words. A lifetime of truth gives weight to words that are difficult to hear. The future messenger lived within these ordinary responsibilities as a husband, father, relative, neighbor, and member of his community. Prophethood is Allah's choice and is not earned through moral effort. Yet the life of the messenger before revelation matters because his people could examine it. His truthfulness was not a new performance created after claiming leadership. Khadijah's later certainty was not based upon a brief impression. It was rooted in years of seeing that his words and actions agreed. Out of reverence, this series will not depict Muhammad, Khadijah, their children, or use objects as personal stand-ins for them. Empty courtyards and quiet rooms can suggest the setting, but they cannot contain the people themselves. What the sources allow us to understand is more important than an invented image. This was a home in which trust had been lived before it would be tested on a scale neither of them could yet foresee. Outside the household, Makkah followed its established rhythms. Caravans arrived and departed. Pilgrims visited the sanctuary. Markets brought opportunity, competition, and inequality. Quraysh held a position of influence connected with the Kaaba, while inherited customs shaped the religious life of the city. Idols were worshipped, and tribal loyalties could determine whose rights received protection. Wealth and status offered security to some while leaving others exposed. Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, did not participate in idol worship. As he approached the age of 40, the moral and spiritual distance between him and much of the life around him became increasingly significant. The sanctuary built for the worship of Allah alone stood amid practices that had departed from the faith of Ibrahim. A city could be busy, prosperous, and respected, while still carrying deep injustice and spiritual confusion. The Seerah does not require us to invent a speech from Muhammad during these years, or assign to him private thoughts the sources do not record. His withdrawal itself tells us something. Rather than seeking attention or authority within Makkah's existing order, he increasingly sought solitude. The noise of trade, status, and inherited ritual gave way to reflection and worship. Above the city rose the rugged mountain known as Hira, physically near Makkah, yet separated from its constant activity. The retreat to Hira was not a comfortable escape. The ascent was difficult, the terrain severe, and the cave small. Seerah accounts describe Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, spending periods there in worship and contemplation, especially as the beginning of revelation approached. Khadijah supported these retreats, and the household made them possible, but strict visual reverence means we will not represent that support through a bundle, sandals, footprints, or any object presented as a personal belonging. The meaning does not depend upon such a proxy. Supporting solitude also required trust. Time away from ordinary work and household presence affected more than the person who withdrew. Khadijah's support therefore belongs within the story, even though the sources do not permit us to reconstruct every practical detail. Solitude at Hira removed the familiar measures by which society judged success. There was no audience, no platform, no wealth to display, and no promise of worldly influence. Below lay Makkah with its sanctuary, markets, families, and rivalries. Beyond it stretched caravan roads and distant empires pursuing their own ambitions. In the mountain stillness, those claims to importance became small. Worship in solitude is known only to Allah in a way public action is not. It strips away the desire to be seen and leaves a person with the truth of dependence upon the Creator. We should not pretend to know every prayer, every reflection, or every moment spent there. The preserved account gives us enough. Before the public mission began, there was withdrawal from false worship and a sincere turning toward Allah. The quiet years were nearing their end, though no one in Makkah understood what was approaching. The merchants continued their calculations. The powerful guarded their privileges. Families slept beneath the mountains, and caravans moved along roads worn by generations. In Khadijah's household, the trust formed through years of shared life remained steady. On Hira, solitude continued beneath a sky known only by its stars and the darkness before dawn. Nothing in the outward scene announced that history stood at a threshold. There was no royal procession, no gathered army, and no public ceremony. This is one of the Seerah's striking contrasts. events that would reshape nations began far from the places where worldly power expected history to be made. The man Makkah knew as Al-Amin had not sought a throne or founded a movement. He had lived truthfully among his people, cared for his household, fulfilled trusts, and withdrawn from the worship of idols. Soon, the stillness of Hira would be broken, and the burden carried down from that mountain would transform the household, challenge Makkah, and reach far beyond Arabia. But that moment belongs to the next episode. For now, we remain with the final silence before revelation. A trusted home below, an empty city settling into night, and a mountain above it waiting beneath the stars.